Well, hello, welcome everyone. I'm really happy to see all these faces joining me in the Jewish tour of Colombia. So thank you so much. I see a few people I actually know. So hello, everyone. And thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen, and as soon as I do it, I'm not going to be able to see you as much. So I'm counting on Mara to interrupt me if there's any logistical questions or issues that I need to know about. Disclaimer, and I've been told about this, sometimes I talk really fast. So if that's happening, please let Mara know, and she'll like stop me and tell me to go a bit slower. Okay. So first I want to start with a video. So I'm gonna take a few minutes of your time to see this video because I want to share a bit of Colombia before we go into Jewish Colombia. So you get to see a bit of us. This is by a very famous Colombian artist. Sorry, I cut it in the middle, and I will send you the link if you want to listen to the whole video. But I just wanted you to see a bit of the different landscapes we have in Colombia and hear a bit of the music so we can get into the mood to do this virtual tour. So first, a bit about Colombia. So we're in South America. You have the map, and you can see where we are with the flag as well. We're around 40 million people in the whole country. It's a tropical country. That means we don't get seasons. So we always have the same weather all the time, and it depends on how high up you are. So right now I'm talking to you from Bogota. That's 2,600 meters above sea level. I'm sorry, I cannot translate that to feet. So that means that we have like a mild autumn weather all the time. And today is sunny because it has been raining a lot. So that's why I'm outside. So you always have the same weather. So if you want to have beach weather, summer weather, you just go down to sea level. And if you want cooler climates, you go up the mountain. We speak Spanish. We have access to two seas, both the Atlantic and the Pacific. And we're the connection between South and Central America, right as the axis. So this is about the country in general. So how about Jews in Colombia? When did we arrive? What happened with us? How did we get here? So the first, when we talk about Jewish presence in Colombia, we have to go back to colonial times to talk about the first presence that were there. Those were Jews that were expelled from Spain, and they came in Colombia. Some say even with the first voyages with Colon, they arrived to this new land, and they started settling in the Americas and Colombia as well. But we do have records from colonial times from Jews who came and established in Colombia, but they kept their Judaism hidden. This is what we think about the Sephardic ancestry. And they kept their Judaism hidden because obviously there was the Inquisition. And with the Inquisition came persecution. That meant that Jews couldn't be freely or openly Jewish. So what did they do? They kept traditions as much as they could, but they kept them under wraps. They presented themselves outside as Catholics, and they presented themselves inside as Jews. Let me go back to this slide for a moment. This picture is of Cartagena. And I don't know if any of you have come to Cartagena. It's like the most touristic, I see a hand raise already, cities in Colombia, and it's very, very beautiful. And if we're talking about Jewish history, Cartagena has one of the three inquisitorial palaces that were in Latin America. The other one was in Mexico and the other in Lima, Peru. So the other is here in Cartagena, which meant that people who were living in Colombia had a inquisitorial palace right there in the country, which meant that they were very, very careful about it, hiding the Judaism. However, there is this record we have that the house that still stands, because you can still visit the inquisitorial palace and the houses around. And one of the houses that is in the same square that the inquisitorial palace is was owned at the time that the Inquisition had their offices there by a hidden Jewish family. So they were living right in eyesight of the inquisitorial palace. Obviously, the houses have been reconstructed and they have been redone now, but you can still visit the inquisitorial palace and see the house where a Jew lived there. So how do we have this memory of them? We actually have inquisitorial offices and documents that tell us about crypto Jews that came and lived in the colonial times, hiding their Judaism. And I can recommend you a book by Alisa Goldschmidt. She right now works at the library in Jerusalem. And she wrote a book about all these records that we have of the colonial Jews from the inquisitorial records. And it's very, very interesting, and it gives us this background. But what happened, going back to the slide again, since the Jews at the time couldn't actually be openly Jewish, that meant that everything kept hidden, and they didn't actually were able to form a community. And I don't know how many of the people joining us today are Jewish. I hope a fair amount of you, but without a community, it's very difficult to keep a Jewish life, because we need a community for everything. We need a community for celebrations. We need a community for a minyan. We need a community for every milestone in our lives. So if they couldn't be openly Jewish, if they couldn't tell other people that were possibly Jewish as well that they were Jewish, they couldn't form a community. And that meant that what they did as a tradition was very private. So they kept some things, and a lot of them fell around the way. And then with time came intermarriage, and then they didn't teach their children about their Jewish tradition and ancestry. So we lost them. They got lost in time. However, what do we have? We have investigations that tell us that a lot of Jews, especially, a lot of Colombians, especially in the municipalities of Antioquia and Santander, these are like very big states that we have in Colombia, in the mountain area, probably a lot of them, are as high as 20% of them, have Jewish ancestry. It means that they're descendants from these colonial Jews. There's no way that we can actually catalog it, and I do get requests a lot of the time from people who are Catholic in Colombia that ask me, I think I have Jewish ancestry, how can I trace this? And of course, well, there are other people who do genealogical, sorry for my English, backgrounds to help them trace this. But what we have this very tiny glimpses, stories, or anecdotes. For example, women in these areas, mostly in the countryside, they have this custom of lighting candles Friday evening. Why? You ask them, why do you light candles? And they say, I don't know, like my mother did it, and my grandmother did it, and her grandmother did it. And we think, okay, so this may be some part of the tradition of the Shabbat candles that we light every Friday that kept, and that they kept doing, and was the thing that remained. Another thing that is very interesting about it as well is that also in the countryside, women go and bathe in the river after they have their period. And again, why? Why do you do this? Why do you do this? My mother, my grandmother, my grandmother, my grandmother, we think, okay, this might be a connection of the law of purity that we go to the mikveh after we have our period. So we have this small glimpses, and also we have some more interesting anecdotes about it. And I'll tell you one real quick. In one of these small towns, the pharmacist of the town died, and he had no heirs, he had no family. So the town eventually went into the pharmacy and started opening things and getting ready for, new occupants and everything. And they found this door that was very locked. And they opened this door that looked old and very locked, and they opened it and then went down some stairs and found a hidden synagogue. Very, very small, very tiny. We have no idea. The pharmacist died. We have no idea why, if he knew, if he didn't knew what was happening there. But there was remains of Judaism, but sadly we lost these communities. And what we have is these anecdotes, this ancestry that survive, and that people in Colombia are very interested in knowing about it. And I think in the few years has been a resurgence of people searching for their ancestry and for their Jewish and Sephardic roots. Also because, I don't know if you're aware of this, but a few years ago, the Spanish government decided to give Jews from Sephardic ancestry the opportunity to apply for Spanish citizenship if you could prove that you have this Sephardic ancestry. But it's actually not just for Jews. These people that I tell you that could maybe trace that they were descendants from these colonial Jews that got lost in time could apply for this citizenship as well. And actually a lot of Colombians has done this, have found, I have a friend who's not Jewish, and she says, oh, all these years, my family trying to hide the Jew in the family tree, and now everyone's looking for it. And they actually found it, and her whole family now has Spanish passports because they did the whole process. So it's a very interesting, weird dichotomy, but we have people who are searching for the roots, someone to know a bit, someone to, have a cultural background of themselves. And some are actually thinking about, okay, I want to embrace these roots and maybe think about converting and becoming Jews. So this is something that is happening right now. What happened after that? So we have a big gap. We have stories of some traders, Jewish traders that came to Colombia in different moments, but they didn't settle here as much. The next big moment that we can speak about is in the 19th century. And this migration was not of groups of communities, but was of individuals. Most of them were Ashkenazis. So we're thinking about Jews that came from Europe, and they came as individuals looking for fortune, looking for the Americas as a new way to gain money, to gain status and different opportunities that they could have. They didn't hide the Judaism. However, most of them were really observant, and they didn't really place Judaism as the most important thing when they came to Colombia. So what do we have information about them? They're families that usually build industries that were famous families later for becoming politician families. But these individuals that came, they intermarried. So then the next generation were not Jewish. So today you have them, and they are families that have Jewish ancestry, but they are not Jewish. Again, what happened? They didn't form a community because it wasn't in the forefront. It was individuals. It was one person here, one person there. They didn't care about doing the work of becoming a community. So if it didn't become a community, they assimilated, and I guess they got lost in time. We have some, I don't know if remains, no, actually, we have some heritage that came with them, industries, different writers' names that were important. Actually, what people call one of the most important novels in Colombia, and not talking Garcia Marquez, which is better for me, but they say that he was written by and it actually was written by a Jewish man who intermarried, and the family isn't Jewish anymore. And he's actually one of our bills that I don't have my wallet here, but he's actually in one of our bills of money as well. So we have this kind of like, I don't know, glimpses of notoriety that came from this second, I can say, migration and presence of Jews in Colombia, but they again didn't create a community. So the Jews that are here today are not descendants from these people. So who are we? That's the question. So to answer who are we, and when I was asked to give this talk, I was asked to talk in first person, to talk personally. So I'm going to deviate a bit here and tell you the story of my family. And through that, tell you a bit about how we came to Colombia. So I'm going to talk about my grandparents on my mother's side. So these pictures that you see here are from the family of my grandfather. They came from Jerusalem. They had been there for a couple of centuries. Before that, they were in Saloniki, and before that, they were expelled from Spain. So what you see in the picture on the left, those are my great grandparents. That's like the oldest picture we have in the family. And they were living in Jerusalem, and they established themselves in Montefiore. Montefiore was the first Jewish neighborhood to be created outside the walls of the old city in Jerusalem. And when it was created, it was really, really poor. It was named Montefiore because Moises Montefiore donated it, but it was really, really poor. Right now it's a high-end, very, very upscale neighborhood, but people who lived there then weren't people of means, and they were really, really poor. You can see the windmill on the back. And what you can see there is actually it's called the Long Building. It still stands, and it's the building where my family lived in number 18. And it was a very, very small room, and all of them lived together there with the extended family as well. I was able a couple of years, and actually last year as well, to visit. Right now it's a very posh hotel. And if you ask nicely in the lobby, they will let you walk outside, and if there's no one occupying a certain suite, you can go and see it for a moment and then go out. So obviously it's been renewed, but you can see the space. And you can imagine how it was a family living there in very crowded space. Obviously, at the time, they didn't have the facilities we have right now. So my family was really poor when they were living in Jerusalem. And they left looking for a better future. And they came not to Colombia, they came to America. The idea was that they were going to migrate and travel to America because they didn't even know about which countries were there and how to get there. They would just take a boat, actually a series of different boats, to arrive to America and hopefully gain fortune. So the ones that came, those were my great grandparents, and that's the picture on the bottom that looks a bit, broken and torn. And those are my great grandparents. So that's Reina and that's Simon. And you can see by the dresses, they kept the culture and they brought it. And one interesting thing that happened is that since they were expelled from Spain, the family spoke Ladino. And Ladino is very, very similar to Spanish. So when they embarked to arrive to the Americas, they had an advantage because most of Latin America speaks Spanish. So they have this tiny advantage that Ladino isn't really Spanish, but they could understand each other. And it will sound like weird, and it will sound like something that will come from a novel from the 18th or 16th century, but they could understand what the local people were saying, and the locals could understand them as well. So they were the ones who migrated with the idea of a better future. And there was this, probably you've heard it as well, there's a story of many families that they said that in America, when you came, the only thing you had to do was pick the gold from the floor because that was all you need to do. And you will have it done because it was a lot of opportunities and of everything again. So they did a very long trip that actually my grandfather, after he came when he was very young, he was 5, but he was very obsessed about having a memory of the family and of the history. So he, speaking with his parents, he cataloged this journey and it took him via Marseille. And it was a months-long journey that eventually led them not to Colombia, but to Mexico. So they arrived in Mexico and they established themselves there actually for a couple of months. But they arrived in 1923. So that was really early. And in those times in Mexico, it was very violent and tumultuous time. So they arrived, they settled for a couple of months, and then a cousin of my great-grandfather went to him and told him, this is very dangerous for you here and for your family, because they did something that it was kind of weird at the time. They traveled together. Usually when people migrated at those times, the man of the family traveled first, arrived, established himself, and when he was settled, he sent for the family, and then the wife and the kids and maybe someone else to extend the family traveled together to join him. That didn't happen. My family traveled all together at once. So when they were living in Mexico, this cousin told them, no, this is not a good place for you. This is very, very dangerous. I'm going to send you to paradise. And he put them on a boat, and the boat arrived in a port in Buenaventura in Colombia. That's near a city called Cali. You saw a bit of that in the video of the area around. And they arrived at that port without knowing actually where they were, what country they were. They just have this tiny bit of paper with the name of a person, the name of a city, and an address. So they had to make their way to Cali when they will meet this person that will take care of them. And they made their way to Cali, and those times traveling a bit of in train, mostly by mule, through different landscape. We have 3 mountain ranges in Colombia. That means I'm traveling in mostly those time was very complicated. You have to go up the mountain, down the mountain, up the mountain, down the mountain. So they did this travel and they arrived in Cali. My grandfather remembers from these first travels in Colombia when they were arriving. He remembers this, and he was very young, he was 5. Remember that they could kind of speak with the local people there. And he remembers that they were traveling and passing through the small towns that were very rural. They didn't have much communication with the outside. And people asked them, why you speak funny? Where do you come from? Who are you? And they all said, no, we are Jewish. And people look at them, will look them up, down, and say, but this makes no sense. You don't have horns and you don't have a tail. How can you be Jewish if you don't have those things? Why? Because most of the knowledge they have was from the church. And the church was teaching at those times that Jews had horns and tails. That's very old, gospel that has these teachings. So they believed that they will spot a Jew because they will have horns and tails. So my grandpa remembered this. They arrive in Cali. They arrive with this name to this address, and the guy welcomes them and says, "I'm sorry, we're full here. Cali's full. I cannot sustain someone else, another family, but don't worry. I'm going to give you another name of another town and another address, and you head there." So they packed and went. It wasn't very far, but those times travel longer. And they went to Popayan, which was a smaller town, and with this other name, and they knocked on the door. And the guy says, "Yes, welcome." And he hosted them, and they live with this family for a few months until they could get their own apartment. And the guy gave my great grandfather a job so he could sustain his family. And they established in San Popayan, and they live few long years there, thanks to this helpful from the different people who helped them get there. And for me, it's kind of difficult to imagine, traveling without knowing where you're going, who you're seeing, and just relying on the kindness of whoever is going to be there to welcome you, just because they know someone and just because you're part of the Jewish community. So this is one of my favorite pictures. It was taken in Popayan in a Passover Seder, as you can see, if you spot the matzah around, with the extended family. And if you see on the right side, the first boy with the big book open, that's my grandfather. And I'm dating 1923-ish because I'm not sure. But you can see that the family has already established themselves. They're living a traditional Jewish life that didn't only have a Seder Pesach, but they had someone to come and take the family picture in this particular moment. So they can have it and keep it. And actually, 100 years later, I still have this picture, and it's one of my most treasured possessions, that we have this memory of how they established themselves in Colombia and kept and brought their Judaism with them as well. So I'm going to make a pause in a moment to talk about my grandmother's side. I don't have as many pictures of that side and not as older pictures of that side. Why? Because my grandmother's side came from Poland. They arrived before the war, so that didn't happen. But they were able to escape the Holocaust themselves as a small family. However, they did arrive because they didn't like living with the anti-Semitism at the time in Poland. They also arrived in the 20s. They weren't poor. They were established, comfortable family in one of the suburbs of Warsaw. But they felt that wasn't a place where they could bring their children. They weren't comfortable with the society. They felt anti-Semitism keenly. So they decided that they wanted to leave. And there was distant cousin of the family who had already come to Colombia before. He had established himself here, and he said, "Okay, you can come here, you can bring your family, and this is a good place to live. You have opportunities, you do not have anti-Semitism, you can come here and you can prosper." And they also traveled together, which was not that weird at the time because they already had a connection in the city that they were going to. So they already had like that first step done. So in the picture on the portrait of the couple, those are my great grandparents. Last name Finkelstein, so you can see the whole thing. So my great grandmother was called Gita, and my great grandfather was called Jankele. What happened? They came to Colombia and they said, "No more. We're done with Poland. We hate Poland. We don't want to speak Polish anymore. We're going to learn Spanish and we're going to speak Spanish. We might still speak Yiddish among ourselves, but we are not speaking Polish, one word Polish ever again. We're changing our names." So my great grandmother was called Lola, and I always knew her as Lola, and my great grandfather was called Jacobo, and I always knew him as Jacobo. Say we're going to make Spanish sounding names. We're forgetting Poland and everything that has to do with this. We're establishing ourselves in Bogota, which is where I live now, and we're going to bring our family here. My grandmother came with them. She was born in Poland, but she was very young. She came when she was just 1 year old. And you see the picture of the river with the women. the one who's walking towards the river, the one in the front, that's my grandmother. She grew up speaking Spanish because she was 1 year old. She never learned Polish. She learned Yiddish because they spoke it at home, but then they start speaking it less and less and less. Eventually, my mother kind of understood Yiddish, but she couldn't speak, and I know how to say a couple of words, and that's it. It got lost through time. In the picture with all that girls that you can see, and you see the arrow pointing to my grandmother, this was a picture of her school, and she was sent to a non-school because when she arrived, there was no Jewish school. And the non-school was the best school that there was. Like the ladies from good families went to this non-school. It was the best opportunity you could have. So she studied there the whole time. And she actually used to tell me she knew all the Catholic prayers because they made her learn it in the non-school. She will never say it, but she know them by heart, she and her sister. My grandmother was called Graciela. We have no doubts about it. She's like, no, the family were like, we're putting Colombian sounding names. This is our new country. So she was called Graciela, and then my uncles, Samuel, Miguel, Anita, were going very Spanish sounding. And my great grandparents learned Spanish, and they spoke in Spanish after they learned it. And they spoke it, well, you know what, an accent, but very, very well. They were very happy about coming to Colombia. And actually, when I was younger, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment, the situation in Colombia was very complicated. And if you wanted to go visit anywhere by traveling, you needed to get tourism visas, and they were impossible because they always say no to Colombians. And there was this opportunity for me to try to apply for a Polish passport through that side. And I asked my family and said, no. The great grandparents, they burned everything. They're like, they don't want to have any memory of Poland, and they don't want any of you to go to Poland to even visit. They don't want to have anything to do with the country. That's how much they wanted this divide. So what happened? This is the Jewish communities in the 20s, and this is a picture of the wedding of my grandparents. They got married in 1949 in Bogota. My grandfather, after he studied primary in Popayán, he went to a boarding school in France for a few years, and then he came back to Colombia, and then he studied medicine in the National University in Bogota. And then he started practicing medicine in Bogota, and then he met, actually in a Purim ball when she was dressed as Queen Hester, my grandmother, and they had a very short courtship, and then they got married very soon, as it was at the time. However, this was a kind of controversial marriage at the time because it was the third mixed marriage. What was mixed marriage? An Ashkenazi was marrying a Sephardic. That wasn't really done there. And why is this so important to say? Because remember, this is a new community, and these are two people's Jews, all of them, but came from different places, different languages, different cultures, different food. And then Colombia was the thing they had in common. It was, they learned Spanish, so Spanish was a language, and they lived here, and they started knowing the culture and mingling with the people. So Colombia became this common ground, and the only common ground they had at the beginning. Because remember, the families probably wouldn't be able to speak much about each other, and they knew about, oh yes, those are the other Jews that are weird because an insert. They eat gefilte fish, or they do not eat gefilte fish, or whatever are the differences between one or the other. So when they were about to get married, they both had people in their family that told them, how are you going to marry that? And they told my grandfather, are you going to marry that Ashkenazi girl? What is she going to cook for you? She's going to give you all the things you don't want. How is that going to happen? And they went to my grandmother and said, you're going to go marry that Sephardic guy. Those are different. They have different cultures, different values. There's going to be what you want it to be. And well, I'm happy to say that they live happily together until my grandmother died in 2006. And, you know, they were the happiest couple I've ever known. And they were a show how this community that we have today created, because first we have these two different groups of people, and then we have this generation that arrived very young or were born here, and they're starting mingling, and they worked together, and they got married. And they got married against the background of this country. They got married in 1949. 1949 was a big event here in Bogota. It's called the Bogotazo, and a big political leader got assassinated, and that sparked a revolt. So it was days of people firing on the streets, a big, big revolt. So actually, when my grandparents were married, they had a curfew in the whole city, and people had to be in their houses by 7 p.m. So they got married really early, and then the close family slept in my great grandparents' house, my grandmother's parents, to continue the celebration because they couldn't go home because the Colombia was in a difficult state there. So this illustrates this immigration we have from both from Sephardic and Ashkenazi sides, and how they established the communities that exist today. How are these communities actually literally established? The interesting part is that in most places, the first thing that happened to establish the community was the establishment of the cemetery. Why? Someone dies, you need to bury them. As a community, you need to bury them somewhere that is Jewish, because these people that I told you before that came in the 19th century, they're like in the central cemetery that is for everyone and is not religious. So what happened? They bought a plot. First, the Ashkenazi community bought a plot to establish as a cemetery, so they had to establish a society for that. And this society became the basis of what later became the community, to buy this plot of land for the cemetery. The story of how the Sephardic community established is a bit interesting, so I'm going to tell it really fast. And is that 3 families from the Ashkenazi community bought a private plot for a cemetery for their family. A small one, not so big, and they bought this plot. And then one person from the family died, a couple of weeks another, and a couple of weeks another. So they buried these people, and the patriarch came to the rabbi and said, "What is happening? Why am I burying my whole family? What's happening?" And the rabbi told them, we as Jews are not supposed to have private cemeteries. That is like inviting death. It's not something you should do. So the patriarch took this to heart, and he says, "No, then I need to sell this. But I already have my people buried there, so I cannot sell it to anyone." So he sold them to the Sephardic. They said, "Okay, you are going to need a cemetery. You're not going to need a cemetery." He wanted his family to still be in a Jewish place. So he says, "Buy this plot for me." And he sold it to them. So again, the Sephardic community had to establish themselves as a society to buy this plot of land. And this became the basis of the establishment of this Sephardic community. I'm talking Orthodox here on both sides, because this was very traditional people who came, and they were very religious and very Orthodox. So moving forward, so the picture black and white on top, those are my grandparents with my mother when she was little. The picture on the left, so you see my grandparents in the middle. You see my mother on the right, my father on the left, and the tiny, very smiley girl, that's me. That's in the 80s, a while ago. And that's actually in the living room of the apartment I live right now. And the one in the bottom is my grandfather performing a Brit Milah, because I told you he studied medicine, he was a doctor, he was a surgeon, but he also studied to be a mohel, and he circumcised more than 1,000 people in the community. So there are generations of people in the community in Colombia that were all circumcised by my grandfather. So how are these communities established? So I told you about Bogota, but we have communities in different places. Actually, the first community to establish was not in Bogota, which is the capital city in Colombia, but in Barranquilla, which is the one on top mostly, and that's by the sea. Those are the first, that's the first community, and also the oldest cemetery in the Jewish cemetery in Colombia is in Barranquilla. And we also have communities in Cali. Remember that first place my grandfather came to with a name and an address in a piece of paper. That's one. And then in Medellin as well. So how many are we? How do we work? That's difficult to count, as always, counting Jews. How do you count us? But we do know that we have lost a lot of the community in the last few years. Not in the last few years, but we lost a lot of the community in the 80s and the 90s. Why? Violence, drug-related problems, and no civil unrest in Colombia. I don't know how much you know about our country and how we work, but we just signed a peace agreement with the biggest guerrilla in our country a few years ago. And it has been a long process to make this a country that has less violence and corruption that we've had in previous years. So again, I'm going to talk about myself. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. So I grew up during this whole very violent, very conflicted part of the history. So I started school, Jewish school. I went to Jewish school. And I started school and I had 40 classmates in my grade. We were 40. When I graduated, we were 20. What happened to the rest? They left the country. Why? Because there was so much violence that people started to become very, very scared. In the 90s, we have this thing that drug gangs and the guerrillas and other type of gangs started kidnapping people for money. So they will go into a house or raid someone, intercept their cars on the street, take whoever they wanted out, kept them kidnapped probably in the jungle for months at a time, and demand money for their family for their release. 1% of the Jewish community got kidnapped in the 80s and the 90s. We're a teeny, tiny minority. There's 40 million people in Colombia. We are around 7,000. That's with the laws we have. So 1% of us got kidnapped, to give you amounts of money. Why? Because, yeah, we do have some people who are prominent and who have money. We have a lot of people who don't. Most of us have weird sounding last names. And for people that equated that this could be a source of money. Oh, you have a weird sounding last name, so maybe you are foreigners, so maybe that equates to money. So a lot of people got kidnapped. And that meant that a lot of people left, had to flee, had to run away from the country. So we had a long loss of people. Things are way better now, thankfully. And in the beginning of the 2000, when security started getting better in the country, a few people started coming back. So we had a recoup of the community, but it's never kind of really recuperated for the violence that we experienced and how things work then. I wanted to give you this. There we go. It has no sound. It's just a video of the Sephardic community synagogue here in Bogota. So you can see a bit of, how the buildings work and a tiny thing of that. Because even through all of this, we have established ourselves and we have everything. So we have communities. In the different cities, we have different communities, Ashkenazi or Sephardic. Most of them are Orthodox. We just have 2 conservative communities. We do not have Reform. So that's what you can experience if you come here to Colombia. You see the sukkah in the background. You can cover that one and it becomes a sukkah. We have a Jewish school, as I told you about. It has changed the amount of people because it shows how many Jews are actually living. So it's gone up and down, but we have a Jewish school in Bogota, and we have also one in Barranquilla and one in Medellin, but most of the students are not Jewish. It's Colombian people who want to know or want to have their kids in a Jewish education because they think it's more liberal and it's more pluralistic, but the Jews in those schools are a minority. In Bogota, the Jews are still the majority in the schools. And the schools, see them picture of the representation of Hitler on the roof, and we have the celebrations of Yom Ha'atzmaut. We have also a Beit Avot that is for elderly people. That's the picture on top. That is an amazing place. The first time I toured, I was like, can I live here? But they say no, there's an age requirement I haven't reached yet. We have choir competitions. We have different synagogues. The picture on the left is with the Ashkenazi synagogue in Bogota. Was built one very renowned architect here in Colombia. So it's a protected place as well. And the picture below, that's actually of the conservative synagogue in Bogota, which also has an interesting story because they started as a German community. This was of German Jews and they spoke German. And then in the 80s, they decided as a community and as a board to become Masorti and conservative. So there was a shift against the population. Some German Jews wanted to become Orthodox, so we went to the Ashkenazi. Some Jews from all the other communities say, so I feel more identified with a conservative ideology. So they went there and now they're the conservative synagogue. So there's a few more pictures of a new Sefer Torah in one of the synagogues when it got brought up, a choir competition, and the choir you see upstairs is the choir, in the upper picture, sorry, is the choir of the Beit Avot, and the celebration of the 80 years, now it's more than 80, this is a very old picture, of the first Ashkenazi community, which was the Centro Israelita de Bogotá, commemorations of Yom HaShoah. We had around 20 survivors that established themselves here in Colombia after the Holocaust. Sadly, now we are down to 3. They have passed away, but we have the families that keep their memory together. And actually, one of the jobs I do is do Holocaust education. And yesterday I was in a police academy here in Colombia to tell the police cadets about the Holocaust. And I was accompanied by 3 descendants of Holocaust survivors that told the personal stories of their family, what happened there, and how they arrived in Colombia and how they established themselves here as well. You see a bat mitzvah in the bottom one. This is one of the events of commemoration of the Holocaust done in a police academy, and also this should be up. And also last year, the embassy with the community here, we light up the insignia building in Bogotá, which is that tower you see there, with we remember and Holocaust Remembers Day, so the whole city could see it as well. So it was a big event. And just to give it a quick wrap up, because I think I'm out of time, just a couple of more pictures of me in different places in Colombia. So the one upstairs on the upper part is in Plaza Bolívar, that is in Bogotá, is where I live, and it's the capital city. The other one, the ones who have been to Cartagena, the one in the left, they can recognize, those are Cartagena streets. And the one below is probably someplace you haven't been, that is in Pasto, in the south of Colombia, in the middle of the mountains, when they have this amazing architectonical church in the middle of a ravine. So it's a very interesting place as well. So I know I talked a lot and I talked very fast, but I wanted to leave time for questions and for you to talk to me as well. So I'm going to actually see if I can stop sharing the screen, and if Mara is there, she can help me. So I can actually see you, because I cannot with this, and we can go to the question part of the events. Sorry, Mara, can you help me on share the screen? I really don't think I can. Oh, yes, here we go. Stop. Great. Okay, so thanks, everyone. I don't know if you have any questions. I don't see Mara around to moderate. Do you see her?
Yes, I'm here. Hi. This was wonderful. And I think you addressed a lot of questions that people had in the chat throughout the presentation. But there are some, and I will actually call on people who have their hands raised so we can hear your voice. So we'll start with Elizabeth. I'm asking you to unmute, Elizabeth, if you're here. Great.
I'm here. Thank you so much for the talk. Very interesting. The picture of Passover with the family, there was a picture in the background. It looked like some rabbi was in that picture against the wall. I was just curious what that was we were seeing. Thanks.
Yes, definitely. And I've been asking about it, and I haven't identified who exactly he is. And if any of you actually can identify, since I have, oh, nice, 444 people here. If anyone can identify, because I asked around the family, can you see who this was? I have it in my mouth, Jewish decoration that we put Jewish things around to see, but if anyone can identify it, will be great for me. Thank you. Sorry, I cannot give you a more specific answer.
Wow, we have so many people with their hands raised, and I just do want to note that we have 10 minutes left. So I think I'm going to unmute Linda and then Jacqueline and then Evelyn. We will hear all of your questions at the same time. We'll try and keep them brief, and then we will turn it over to Vivian to address them. So I'm Linda, if you're up.
Okay, the two things that are very fast is that if you could put the information about the book that she mentioned at the beginning in the chat, and tell us what town that pharmacy was in that they found the hidden synagogue. But my real question is this. Do you know anything about the Jews who settled in the Colombian Llanos who were Sephardic, and they came from Curacao through Venezuela at the end of the 19th century to the area around Oroquay.
I
And if she
didn't
knows
speak
anything
much
about them.
Yeah, don't worry. So thank you so much for your questions. Sorry, you were gonna take three, but no, these are three together. So please let me answer.
Yes.
I'll forget. So I didn't speak about the Sephardics who came from Curacao. They came, went. We do have documents, in our knowledge, of them establishing, but in the coast mostly. So we do have information, and it's one of them, I don't know, archaeological mysteries of an even older cemetery that the one in Barranquilla, which I told you is the first, that is in Santa Marta, which is in another town in the coast, but it's a lost cemetery. We have records detailing, talking about the cemetery, but we haven't found it. It's one of the mysteries we have. I do not have information about the Llanos, but it's a good question, and I will endeavor to see more about it. We have one researcher who is the one who knows the most about the Sephardic who came from Curacao and established in the 19th century. And I can send probably Mara, and she maybe can email everyone who registered for the presentation about the book I recommended from the Colonial Times about this researcher and the book she has about the topic. What I don't know is how much she has in English. I do know she has in Spanish, but she may have something in English as well. And if someone knows anything about it, it would be her because she's amazing.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Jacqueline.
Okay, I just have a comment. I'm of Ashkenazi descent. My husband was from Baghdad, and our children, when our daughter married a fellow from Barranca Bermeja, and his was raised Catholic, but he didn't care about religion. His mother always goes around with the rosary and the Bible, but there was something Jewish about them. I just always felt that in my heart. And he did DNA, and he found that he had Jewish blood in him. So this was so interesting for me. Thank you, because I see how it happened. And someday I want my grandchildren on that side to do DNA, and it's going to be very interesting. But can you, what do you have to do to prove to get Spanish citizenship? What kind of documents, like if he just showed his DNA, would that be anything or not really?
No, they need to do, I'll tell you because I did it. So you need a different set of documents, but the most important document is granted by the Sephardic Federation in Spain.
Okay.
And they do two things. One, if you're Jewish, if you are part of a community that is affiliated with them, it will be very easy, very quick. If you are not, or if you're part of a community that is not affiliated with them, you have to prove not just genetics, but also genealogical ancestry. So like my friend that I told you about who's not Jewish, she had to hire someone, a I cannot say this word, sorry, to figure out the family tree, to find the Jew in the family tree, to prove that it existed and that they are descended from them, to do that. So, but you can search around their services
Thank
of
you.
how you can do that. So go for it, sorry.
Thank you so much. So we just have 6 minutes left, so we'll go to Florine and then Arlene.
Hi. Last time I was in Bogota was 1974. I was working there. I was there many times. There was no civil marriage. So if people from one faith wanted to marry a person from another faith, it was almost impossible. One sort of had to convert. Do you have civil marriage now in Colombia?
Yes, we had a new constitution in the 90s, and that instituted a lot of things that people before didn't have. Not just that, like they didn't have a birth certificate; they just have like a baptism certificate. So people couldn't, like prove that they had a child, stuff like that. We do have civil marriage now, and people usually in the Jewish community, they marry through a Jewish, ceremony through a rabbi, and that's the anniversary they keep. And then they go whenever they can to the notary, sign the papers, and that's the whole other thing. I was the other day in a Passover Seder in the rabbi's house, and they asked this question around to the couples. They're like, who knows wedding anniversary, but not the Jewish, but the day you sign in the notary. Not one of the people there knew that.
Yeah,
Just a day that they don't care much
not
about.
ready. I'm not done with my Zoom.
Oh, okay, great.
I
So,
thought you said Evelyn earlier.
sorry, we're just getting some background noise. Vivian, we have so many hands in just a few minutes. I want to make sure that people can maybe contact you or learn more about the work that you do and support it. So if there's an email or a website that you would want to share in the chat, I think now would be a great time so people have a
Let me
minute.
share my mail and everyone in meeting, so you can contact me.
Perfect. And I think we were going to go to Arlene for maybe our last question. Maybe we can fit another one in. But Arlene, are you here?
Yes, I am. Hello. Let me start video. I'm just wondering what the intermarriage rate among Jews is in Colombia and how much assimilation there is, how much intermingling with non-Jews, and what the rate of intermarriage is.
Okay, so we don't have that much intermarriage. Usually when people marry outside of the community, they convert the partner converts. That's the norm here. Obviously, we have cases when it doesn't happen, but those tend to be the exception and not the rule. Mostly, they will convert the partner and then the kids will be Jewish and that will happen. We do not have that big problem with assimilation. I think our biggest problem is with people emigrating outside of Colombia and keeping our institutions, but and that doesn't have to do with the community here, it has to do with the opportunities young people see in this country as a whole and not in the community specific. But thankfully, intermarriage and assimilation is not usually a big problem here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Vivian. And Evelyn, I think you'll be our final question, and then we'll have Vivian leave us with some final words.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vivian. It was very interesting. Two questions. The beginning of your lecture, you said the Jews had to be like crypto Jews, had to hide it. I don't see didn't hear a delineation of where Jews could practice more openly, and maybe connected to that is when did the Inquisition cease harassing and persecuting Jews?
So they couldn't actually, in those times, they couldn't practice openly because they had come here through the idea that they were new Catholics. So they had to hide their Judaism. So they couldn't actually at all at any time. And the Inquisition was well alive until the 17th century. So no, they couldn't practice there either. So before I leave, I couldn't read the whole chat, but I scroll quickly so I can answer 3 or 4 questions that I saw that are very quick. So we do have kosher meat. We have a show head here, and we have a very big kosher meat market. If any of you come, I gave you the website of the Confederation of Jewish Communities, which is the umbrella organization of the communities in Colombia, where I work. And there's some information about the community, but also practical information if you want to come. So if I want to go to a Shabbat at the synagogue, if I want to visit, if I want to have kosher information, you can find that there. So that's one thing there. I saw that like how to just look like me. And if you see me, I'm like very Colombian looking, like dark eyes, hair, everything. I'm adopted. My parents, I couldn't get into this in the story because of time, but my parents couldn't have kids. And after a long discussion, they decided to adopt. So they adopted me. And as the recommendation is for Jewish families who want to adopt, they wouldn't adopt from a Jewish family because maybe it will be a problem of, marrying someone in your family in the future or something like that. So I was adopted and I was converted at 2 months old, which was a very quick conversion, just, like a blessing, and I dipped in the mikveh and then a promise to raise me Jewish, which happened, and here I am. And so, like genetically, I'm not Jewish, but I am Jewish. So that's the question of how we look like this. And we do, another question I saw around, we did have a few people who came from Venezuela to Colombia, but most of the Venezuelans went to Miami, actually. So we don't have as many big Venezuela community here, but we did have an influx of Venezuelans in Colombia that are part of the community right now. Those are the ones I saw. I know I missed a few, and I'm gonna ask Mara to send me the chat so I can read the comments and the email
Yes,
and
I'm
the
happy to
more
send you
thoroughly.
the chat.
And
So
also you have my email, so you can contact me. Feel free to contact me for whatever you need and to visit the website. I'm really here for you as well.
thank you so much. I want to make sure that we get everyone the website. I just added your email to the chat, but remind us what the website is where people can find the information you mentioned.
So it's the website of the umbrella organization of the Jewish communities in Colombia. It's mostly about the political work we do with the government and interfaith and all of that. But there is also a tiny space about the small history of the community and form that you can fill if you are visiting and want to go into a synagogue. So you get to fill that the link to fill that form and a bit of information about how to contact us as well. So that's what you see in that. If you want anything more specific, please feel free to email me. That's why I shared the email with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And a reminder to everyone, we will be sharing the recording, so you're welcome to share this presentation with your friends and family. We look forward to seeing you in our next Diaspora Jewish Community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.